Hi YouTubers, my name is Ian Brown and I just wanted to quickly give you my brief analysis on the politics of Russia and fighting in Ukraine. I wanted to just state real quickly that there is only my opinion on the situation in Ukraine and Russia. It's coming from news articles that are current, coming from the media, and it's really just about me sharing my love and interest in politics for what's taking place around the world. I do have a background in political science, and uh, I do have an interest in foreign affairs and international relations. So I wanted to present this to you just so you guys could have an opinion and see what I have to say about it. If you guys could leave any comments or suggestions in the comments box, I would appreciate it greatly. The problem with Ukraine and Russia right now is that Russia is probably going to conquer Ukraine at some point if they continue the war. And if this takes place, then Russia will be in control of Ukraine and will be bordering fellow nations in Europe that have NATO there. And I just wanted to point out that this is not going to be a good situation in the long run because the countries previously, Ukraine and Belarus, were not NATO countries, and so they provided a buffer zone between Russia and Western Ukraine. What I believe is going to be happening in the future is that there will be heightened tensions between the Russian countries controlled by Russia or influenced by Russia and the NATO countries that are bordering Russia. Currently, Sweden and Finland are not they are not NATO nations, but they are looking to become NATO nations. So they may become uh, NATO nations in a way that is going to be a threat to Russia on their border. I don't know if Russia will invade NATO, or excuse me, I don't know if Russia will invade Finland or Sweden, but there is a serious threat of heightened tensions that could lead to conflict due to the bordering nations on Russia being NATO nations. So what this means is that in the past there was a greater chance of peace between these nations, between Russia and Western Europe, because the the buffering zones, as I call them, were not NATO countries, and this provided a buffering zone to kind of decrease the tensions between those two powers, Russia and the NATO countries. If Russia takes Ukraine and they control Ukraine completely, then there is a serious threat that they will be threatened by the fellow nations to the borders of Ukraine that are NATO nations, and so this will be a major problem for them to uh, to deal with in the long run, and it could increase the chances of a war between NATO and Russia. My hope is that Russia does not invade Finland or Sweden, and my hope is that they do not heighten tensions between um, the NATO countries of Western Europe. Ideally, it would be great if Ukraine stayed as an independent nation and was not NATO, and Russia was not threatened by Ukraine. But since they're devoted to conquering Ukraine, we'd have to wait and see what takes place in the future. I think it's important, though, to pay attention to Germany rearming itself and then also what France does in the long run. And the reason I say this is that as Russia becomes a greater threat and feels threatened by NATO nations, there's a greater chance that arms will be proliferating and going into an arms race to try to detour war. And so the chances that this becomes a serious problem will explode and become a much bigger problem if Russia invades Finland um, and Sweden. And so if that takes place, then you have a very good chance that there's a major war on the future horizon between Western Europe and Russia. You simply can't have Russia invading all these countries and conquering them. It just won't be acceptable in the long run. So with that said, I just wanted to point out that it's very important to pay attention to the outcome to Finland and Sweden becoming NATO members, but also whether or not Russia puts troops on the border of Finland and whether or not they invade Finland. And then the important part is to recognize what Russia does with Ukraine after conquering Ukraine, because it will be bordering NATO nations again, and that brings heightened tensions. Ideally, this war is actually not a good thing for Russia or Europe because of the heightened tensions that will be between the competing forces, between Russian forces and NATO forces. There's less buffer zone between the two competing forces, and that's not going to be a good thing in the long run. So I just wanted to share that with you. It's my personal opinion. I could be wrong. We'll have to wait and see. Hopefully everything pans out for the best. I hope that Ukraine comes out of this in a scenario that's best for them, and that Russia is considerate to what's going on within the scenario between Ukraine and the rest of the world. So thank you so much. If you guys have any comments, please feel free to leave them in the comments box. I would love it if you could subscribe to my channel. And yeah, thank you again. I appreciate it.